This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, I asked Joey about finding empathy for each other.
Woo!
How can I just let you walk away? Let you leave without a pod? No, I mean, whatever. This is what a joke sounds like. And this is what an executive producer and in the air tonight, Jess Vander sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess. Are those
Both
both Lion King adjacent? Or Phil
No.
Collins? Phil Collins. Phil Collins?
I like that anything related to Phil Collins is hereby described as Lion King adjacent from now on. That's, I mean, I don't know, is that Phil Collins and Genesis minimizing or
Right. Because he actually
Lion
did
King
Tarzan. But then, anyway.
Yeah, did he do anything from the Lion King soundtrack?
No, I was just in the
Definitely
air
Tarzan.
tonight. In the air tonight makes me think.
Oh.
Because it's close enough to "Can you feel the love tonight?" And then I admit that is a stretch and my fault. So sorry.
Just housekeeping. I do have like a small housekeeping thing that's just like a funny tidbit on the back of our dating app conversation that I saw. Bumble had released height preferences from female users, and they have it on like a bell curve, and like what seems to be about the median line on the bell curve is 6'8". Maybe like 6'6" is the median line, and I'm just like laughing, imagining like desired height. Like these are like filters in advanced filters by female users by height, and it's like
these tall hotties.
The median is 6'6".
That's insane. These tall hotties, I swear, are all gonna have to be on one app. That's the only solution here. Actually, I also have a follow-up on that, especially on the subject of height. I was bringing up this conversation to a friend of mine, and she was saying, "Oh, that's so funny. I'm like she was saying she's like a cusper on like, in between inches, and she's like, I always round up because you have to account for men who lie, and and I don't want them to be disappointed when I'm taller than them in person.
Yeah.
So I just I have to overestimate to account for it all. I was like, wow, all these politics.
The person who shared this said it's not so erudite is their Twitter handle, but it says dating apps are terrible. This is a great example of why women pre-selecting by height like this is stupid. Y'all just want someone who's as tall as you or a bit taller. Quit manifesting. But then I like alternatively, I had just seen like a funny video somewhere, and it was like an Australian like radio show or something, and one of the hosts was reading like a listener email or something, and they were like, I'm like 6'1.5", and I often meet people who say that they're 6 feet tall, and when it's obvious that I'm taller than them, I tell them that I'm 5'11" just to see how they react. And I was like just giggling to myself about it. Chaos agents.
That is chaos agent for real. Also, now I just I have to just add to, I would love for some, I guess, is this like an orthopedist to release some kind of survey or some kind of analysis with Bumble to be like, you don't want to be like bending over like a foot. That distance is just like not practical for your back health.
Yeah, this
I don't know why
disparity
that's
is
the first thing
creating
I thought of.
herniated cervical vertebra left and right. It's a public health crisis.
Exactly, it's a public health crisis to be reaching for 6'6" median or whatever you said. Oh my gosh, that's so
yeah.
funny.
Yeah, it's somewhere in the upper sixes where like the average height of a man in the US is somewhere around like 5'8". So you're swimming in a
Keep
small
dreaming?
pool is I guess the yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Literally
Jess,
lower
I
your
think that's a
expectations.
yeah. There we go. Hey, well, what do you have for us now that our house is cleaned and shortened or heightened? I don't know. Our house is at a different altitude.
Great. That's clean. So finally I can share that I was very caught off guard walking yesterday. A stranger behind me blessed me after I sneezed. And it was so shocking that someone was not only paying enough attention, but that their immediate reaction I had not fully realized until I was thinking about it as I continued to walk wasn't something like creating more distance between us or like trying to uh just avoid my airspace in some other way, and obviously more likely saying nothing in the context of the New York culture. And it just immediately set me off into this tailspin thinking about some article that I'd also seen recently about um, how people have lost empathy for parents whose children are screaming on airplanes, and how actually on this same train ride home before I was walking and this whole saga unfolded, I also was on a train car with a dad whose child was um, just like unwilling to sit and then got startled when the train jerked around and then was completely inconsolable, and everyone on the train is like throwing glares over. And I know that we've had conversations on this show in the past about compassion fatigue and empathy fatigue, but this question and or even just this idea that my baseline expectation is that has shifted to a point where I just expect less of other people, and I expect them to care less about me and be looking out much more for themselves in this day and age. Maybe because new norms have shifted in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially. But I've seen articles and pieces written about family structure and how it used to take a village, but now I guess it's all on you alone. And I just feel like there's a lot more to unpack. Also, just because this topic has bounds, boundlessness. No bounds. Thank you. Finally made it. To get to the bottom of this question, where might we find more empathy for each other?
This is I don't know. It's a thing I think about a lot. It's like one of those sort of arenas. There's like a handful of areas where you like touch base on often, or like for me, it's like thinking about time dilation and thinking about being nice to other people in public are like two of the things in that list.
Yeah.
And I've always tried really hard to be generous with my time and to acknowledge other people's existence even when it's uncomfortable. So like doing the bless you thing when you're like in a new space or whatever. I was like standing in line at my niece's softball tournament waiting to use the bathroom, and there's a little kid in front of me, it was probably 9, that sneezed, and I said thank you. Or I didn't say thank you. Thank you for your sneeze. I said bless you. And it was funny because it just like opened the space that we were both sitting in a little bit, and then he like made a joke to me after about like some kid walking by, and it just sort of like, right, like you're establishing like a, hey, like I saw that you're a person, I'm also a person here, as opposed to
Yeah.
like inanimate objects sharing a space together. But
Yeah.
I also have had like a bit of a confrontation with this recently, where I'm like reaching like limits of it in a particular arena. So I mentioned online that we were like getting ready to hire some folks in a strategy role, and the post just, whatever blowing up on LinkedIn is, which is like a different
It blew up
conversation, I
on
guess. But
LinkedIn
and
when I
we just got
dropped this
so
post.
yeah, exactly.
Let the post drop.
It just got
Sorry. Go
so
on.
stupid.
On.
uh it it just got so much attention, and there was so much like inbound communication from a lot of people who are to this point genuinely strangers, and under normal
Mhm.
circumstances, when there's not like such a high volume of those interactions, I always make it a point to respond to anyone who's messaging me. But I was getting like so flooded and so behind that it was just like impossible to keep up with it. And I think like for the most part now, I have responded to everyone who directly messaged me, but it was like it was so hard, and I like left the dynamic just like feeling shitty for not, not sort of holding to some
Mhm.
ideal around empathy like you're talking
Mhm.
about, because it's like pushed to a limit. And I think that's a lot of what we, right, there's like discussions of empathy fatigue have gone around over the years, or things like that. But there's sort of like everyone's going to have a limit with which they're going to be able to operate within, and at some point if you cross that line, you're just like run out. And it may not be based on like using up all of your empathy, it just may be like using up all of your like social interaction, or using up all of like your stress, or whatever it is. And that's like that the tolerances of the idea are sort of interesting to me. Like I think what you said is important, just to like talk to people, but I don't know if that necessarily like gets at the root of your question.
Well, yeah, and it's also like what like the expectations are around these different contexts. Like in that scenario, in sort of where you have been the initiator in a way, because you're inviting like, hey, come do this, and then you're like, actually I'm not prepared. Like you ticket mastered that, not really, but like, did you ticket master
Yeah.
them to an Eras tour kind of a
Yeah.
situation? Like you're like, yeah, you can
Oh
get this. No,
no.
no, no, sorry, wasn't ready for that.
Yeah.
um but I think that it's really interesting to think about how, we've talked also a lot about like the social contract, but like, do I like do I just fundamentally not expect people to bless me anymore when I sneeze? Like I think a shift has happened where I don't anymore expect that, though I'm like, oh, pleasantly surprised and appreciated if someone is giving me that bid of consideration. Um and like you said, with, the kid at the soccer field or whatever, that it has surprising benefits, and maybe we could do it more if it's so effective. But it's just it's interesting to me to think that um some of these things that maybe were sort of etiquette necessities have really shifted even in a really short while.
Mhm. Yeah, it sort
And
of
and I'm
goes
saying
back
this
to that.
also like, also, just like to caveat too, I'm saying this as like a Brooklyn, New York City dweller, who, I'm sure if you go to different parts of the country, may not be this way at all.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's sort of where I was thinking about, right? Like, what are the social and cultural norms? And we've talked about in the past, like, every so often the meme comes back up about, like, you know, people in the South are nice but not kind. People in the Northeast
Mhm.
are kind but not nice, and like they do different regions, and usually people will fill them out differently to suit their whatever agenda about how they are regionally as like a group of people. But it gets to that idea, and I think like a lot of the cultural norms within at least New York City, where both of us live, is to like give people some sense of social privacy in shared spaces, right?
Right.
Where there's like a norm to not bother others,
Right.
uh, and,
We're
and
already on
that you
top of
can
each
be
other.
like,
Give me space.
yeah, yeah, you can be alone together if you so choose. You don't have to be, but if you need something or if you ever see someone in distress, there is also a norm that you should then react and help or do
Yes.
something about it, right?
Yes.
And that it comes back to like, do you see people as people? I think is sort of like a root idea of empathy. And then the question of, there have been ideas over the past, I don't know, like 5 to 10 years that have come out where people have tried to push these ideas further and be more descriptive. And one of them is the idea of radical empathy, which is around like doing anything within your power to reduce the suffering of those around you, which is like an entirely different, or not an entirely different concept per se, but is like pushed to an even greater degree. And like, what is the norm, and like, what is it that we're hoping for? Like, does everyone want niceties? Like, I personally am cool with like simple social niceties. I participate. I say thank you if someone holds the door for me. Like these
Yeah.
sort of like manners based things. Like, I like
Mhm.
those. It's like simple acknowledgments of other people's actions. But is that what you're thinking about, or like in asking how do we feel more empathy for each other? Like, what types of outcomes are you hoping for?
Well, I guess that is part of the problem is like even what those outcomes should be may just lie in the beholder of the the eye of the empathy beholder, as it were. Um,
Yeah.
Something that Ryan and I have been talking about recently at home is uh, the appropriate deplaning etiquette and
Mm.
how and like what are you optimizing for when getting off of an airplane? Because there is one sort of school of thought, I suppose, that you must allow those in front of you to deplane in the order in which you were seated effectively. So it goes row by row, and you wait for the last
Mhm.
person of the rows in front of you to go before you go. But there is also the conundrum of the fact that you've got bags up above, not everyone can move as speedily. And so there is a case to be made that even though you aren't moving in order, if someone is ready, should they just be able to go? Like if they're standing up, they've got their bags, can they just go ahead of you, even if that means passing your lane? And it's so interesting. There was an interaction that Ryan had where he he saw an opportunity as somebody where like he had his stuff together, and so he just decided to take the opportunity, and someone behind him muttered like, asshole, and he was like, oh, I thought I was optimizing for the efficiency of the process and like trying to get us all
Mhm.
off of here faster, but to that other person they were like, how rude, you broke the social norms of the way we do this, where I go, and then
Yeah.
the next person goes and whatever. um and it's so interesting because even in an attempt to be empathetic, to try to be considerate, though I guess those two things are different, but in an attempt to be considerate, even that still may not necessarily land when you're in a different space.
Yeah, I mean, I think first of all, the row order thing is the way to do it, unless there is like a pause when it is the next row in front of you, which is where, like, yeah, I always just travel with a backpack under almost all circumstances, so it's real easy for me to go. And if someone's like stuck in their seat and fumbling around with something and they haven't even got to the aisle to go in the overhead at the point where it's like to my row, I will
You
jump.
should go.
Yeah.
Even if it's the
Yeah.
person if it's the last person in the row in front of you, but they are not together, you should go, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Hundy. Yeah.
Hundy.
But the different question about this, right, is the idea of empathy, I think, on its like base sort of foundational reasons why we would talk about it is to be able to put yourself in another person's shoes and be able to act in a way that is not like solely self-serving, or at least like treat other people as if they are individual humans with independent desires and motivations and experiences that might be contributing to how they're acting in a certain way. And I think what, you know, if we think about social forces that we've talked about, whether, you know, it's polarization or, you know, sort of dehumanizing out groups or things like that, like what we're really talking about in this is not necessarily to change your behaviors towards other people, right? Like these ideas that you just brought up of like conscientiousness, consideration, politeness, like I mentioned, are all about like choices in social interaction, which feel like independent of just seeing another person as a human being that has independent ideas and not choosing to dehumanize them when they don't agree with you, and or like in a even further step to help or support them because you understand them to be human beings and you can put yourself in their position and sort of feel what they may be feeling in a certain context. And so like that part of it is like do we have questions of, you know, like different ideas of conscientiousness or politeness, or like the plane deboarding is fine, right? Like, but the difference is like if you think someone's an asshole, do you have to say it because they are like a person, right? Like that's like what I think in my head versus what I do externally, because it will have an impact on someone
Yeah.
if they hear it, is like that sort of like is like almost at like the point where we're talking about of like how do you choose to act towards someone else if you assume that they are also a human being, right? Like I saw a
Right.
woman, I flew last week, a woman like ran up and was like sort of jumping the line and being weird as we were deplaning, and I was like, okay. In my head I literally was like, okay, chill. Like, you know, like and then she like ran off the plane and like ran across the way, and she was trying to get
Making
onto
a
a connecting
connection.
flight that we
Yeah, of
were late
course.
to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I it's interesting to hear like the sort of self-talk that you could try to instigate sort of this like in these late stage moments where it's like giving grace and trying to shift your perspective, so in those moments things are different, or like you could try to find this type of empathy. I was also looking into sort of like early stage empathy exercises that you could do to basically um
Mhm.
to help sort of like create that, especially in instances like in a
Mhm.
workplace where you're interacting with people in recurring contexts. And um a few of the exercises that I found in this article reminded me, when I read them I was like, "Oh, this is just like tricking yourself into some of the um what are they? They're like known cognitive biases, I guess, or like things that
Mhm.
we naturally like. We like people that we are like the more we know about them, like the more we like them. So it makes sense that one of the
Yeah.
exercises is just like talk to them and like get to know them better. And that's true of say even projects that we work on here. It's why you know, in many of our projects we'll have a lot of these internal kickoff conversation moments to try to just like you don't have to be best friends, but like the more you know the people, the more likely you are to be able to consider them as people. And similarly, like another exercise they were saying was just try taking a walk in someone else's shoes, for example, just like attend someone else's synagogue, or like I don't know, like go just like do something that is atypical, or maybe in the context of the other person. Like it's easy to trash talk parents, and then you go babysit, and then you're like, okay, that is,
Yeah.
you're right, that is hard to do. I can't do that, and I understand now
Yeah.
what it's like.
Yeah. That first point makes me think about this as like the inverse crush, right? Like what is the inverse of the crush of like when you hate someone and you don't know them? Like the
Yeah,
crush is like loving
I
someone
love that.
or glorifying or aggrandizing them before you know them, that like if only I was with them, my life would be so much greater or grander. And the inverse is like just seeing someone that you know nothing about and being like they're an asshole, right? You know, like
The crush.
completely like painting them in the
Yeah.
reverse. And
Yeah.
what's interesting is that like no one is ever as great or as terrible in almost any circumstances as you would expect them to be when you're in like a shared circumstance. Like if you were in an equivalent circumstance, you know, the disparity is not as great as you would anticipate most of the time. And I listened to this long talk on YouTube about this guy wrote a book, and I'm blanking. I'll pull up after his name just so I can cite it. But it was like a 2-hour big think talk about like leadership, evil. It just like popped into my algorithm for whatever reason, and he was talking about we evaluate leaders incorrectly because invariably when you have a lot of power and you make a decision, there's invariably going to be harm, but it's about harm reduction. Like who, like in any circumstance, if you choose A, like B may get hurt, or if you choose B, A may get hurt, but like which is like the lowest harm, and evaluating decisions based on alternative outcomes as opposed to the outcome by itself. And I think like this, it made me think about this circumstance where it's like we don't know enough about people to be able to have any kind of evaluative criteria externally. And so if you just start with the assumption that like they're probably not that bad as like a baseline repetition in your head, I try
Yeah.
to do things like when I'm in public of like just analyzing people, like observing like what are like
Mm.
things on, you know, like sort of not like Sherlock Holmes, but like Sherlock Holmesing, like what shoes are they wearing? Like how are they walking? What are they carrying? Like how do they look? Or, you know, what are they eating? Like all of those things, trying to build a story. And for me, at least, that starts to humanize people, even though I'm like making up a story. But it's like
Mhm.
if I could either crush on them or inverse crush on them, if I like start to make a story, I can at least sort of guide it down like the middle road as opposed to like falling too far in either direction, you know?
Yeah, and those details and things are a start. It makes a ton of sense then why, a lot of the, sort of like prestige or high quality television and movies these days like make villains so compelling by giving more detail. I feel like the like whole thing about like villains of yore is that like, oh, they're just like pure evil. There's like there's like no motivation or like
Yeah.
no other context. They're just like, that's a bad guy. And so I feel like it's really interesting how that even works in sort of like the entertainment context, where you are just more invested the more you know, the more context there is. I feel like Aaron would probably have a thought if you were on the call about he loves the context, the
Yeah.
contexting.
Yeah, like Well, it's more realistic, right? Like, I'm sure there are like, like pure good or pure evil people in the world, but like the vast majority of people don't fall within that spectra, and like we are a product
Yeah.
of our circumstance and our experience and our genetics, and it is like this whole like big milieu of interactions that turn us into who we are, and so when you have a villain who has maybe noble aspirations but ignoble actions, then it feels more realistic and compelling, and that you have more complex emotions about them
Yeah.
versus like simply hating them, of like, oh, they seem like a good person that has made a lot of bad decisions, right? It's like we rewatched like the Star Trek reboot movie trilogy like over the past few nights, and
Mhm.
like the villain in the third one, I guess spoiler alert, is like someone who got sort of trapped in a situation where you would lose your mind a little bit, and was kind of like almost like a working dog, like didn't have their job anymore and like lost it, and the way in which they resolve that is to do bad things, but like you can at least like track how you would get to that point, versus just like, you're just pure evil, you are the
Right.
devil. Like,
Right.
it's like, how did you become the devil?
Yep. Well, is this are we arrived? Are we at the corner?
We could be. Gauge my emotions. How am I feeling? You guess how I'm feeling through empathy to
how am I
determine whether we
feeling?
are at the corner.
Or
I
just
think we're
like
there.
ask you if we're at the corner. I
Yeah.
I love this idea that like it's probably a good story. You might not see how it started or how it ends. So be generous in how you write the rest of the story in your own head if you don't get
Yeah.
the satisfaction of seeing the woman make her connection. Like the even if you can't see the story become good, meaning it's not just a matter of pure evil. It's like, yeah, that was kind of bad story. That's like
Mm-hmm.
that is, come on, life isn't written that way. It's going to be so much more interesting than that. And I just like the idea of all of us reminding ourselves, like, it's probably a better story than that. It's probably not as simple as like,
Yeah.
that guy sucks.
Yeah. And like you don't have to like someone, and even if you don't like them, doesn't make them a bad person, right? Like,
Yeah.
tough
or
hang, but not evil. Yeah.
more but that's more fun. There's a clash between great story but like more fun for me.
Yeah.
Easier to just be like, ugh. Yeah. Come on.
But I like that, like, you don't know the whole or how did you phrase it? I like the way that you phrased that wrap up.
It's probably
There's
a
more
good
to the story.
even if you
It's
even if you
probably a
don't
good
see how it
story. Yeah.
starts or how it ends. So yeah, we're all just left to write the rest that we don't know in our heads, and try to make it good, guys,
Yeah.
gals,
Guys,
folks.
just do it.
And don't get your Phil Collins references wrong, and just make sure it's probably Tarzan, okay? It is, or it's not.
Are you Are you a stranger story writer? Do you do that too?
What is that?
Just like writing stories in your head about strangers, like trying to fill in the blanks. Like, I do it all the time.
Interesting. I don't know if I would do it the same way that you do, but I definitely, especially, it's pretty hard not to in New York, especially if you were a subway goer, to sort of just like creep on what someone's looking at on their phone and just think like, wonder what that's for. Or this person today that I saw, who I was just sort of, I was like, I wonder like what the process was of this person getting ready this morning. Like, I know the way I get ready every day, but how this individual landed in such a creative, unexpected set of choices in a fashion context, like that's a totally different mental model of like, yeah, those socks match. Very interesting.
Yeah,
I
I'm
wonder
not
what it'd be like to wake up and think
plots.
these socks match.
Yeah, I'm not writing plots. I think I'm almost like it's like character analysis a little bit of like,
Wow.
oh, you're covered in tattoos, but you're wearing like a very elegant, very professional dress with like choiceful shoes, and you're reading a self-help book. I'm like, okay, you had like a really wild phase. The music you're listening to is probably like metal, and you're finding yourself in a professional context where you're trying to build confidence. So you're choosing to, like, I'm just like stacking these things based on like
You're
any
like,
visible
I see
external
the
signals.
character. Yeah, it's so clear. What might she do next?
Yeah. Oh, she's going to a job interview. Like, I don't know. Yeah. Anyways, well, we did it.
Yeah, it's the corner after the corner. Sort of.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by Stretch Those Legs! You've been sitting for far too long on that plane. You gotta stand up right now.
Do you want a pulmonary thrombosis? Anyways, as always, we'd like to thank our executive producer and pulmonologist, Jess Vander.
That's funny. Thanks, Joey. We'd also like to thank sound engineer and the pilot of this Alex Contel.
We'd like to thank our programming coordinator and feeler of feelings, Les Jacobs.
And thanks to our production help and the door openers of Niceties, Sarah Gilbert and Nora Mestrich.
And as always, thanks, Elen.
Thanks.
Special thanks to, can we say, daughter Burns? Like how about like, female youthful relative burns? Because my niece and my daughter have both burned me like significantly in the past like 5 days. Like I currently have
ice for
COVID.
That burn?
Yeah, I currently have COVID. Fun. And my daughter this week, I asked her why she did something, and she looked at me and she went, because I have 1 line and you have 2 lines. So, and stuck her tongue out and ran away. And I was like,
as in the COVID test?
What? Yeah, as in like our test results on the COVID test. And I was like, wow, you're an asshole.
Oh boy. Hatred. Born at a young,
But
spun
it's, like,
at a
funny.
ripe age.
Yeah. I'm like, good joke, but it hurts,
Yeah, it's cutting deep. I like to thank Paramore for their song Crush, Crush, Crush. You got me through that time in your life where everyone's listening to Paramore.
You dealt with your crushes by listening to songs about crushes. It's like a little on the nose, but like whatever works, I guess.
I don't know if those things have to be related. I feel like it was just a life stage. Anyway, I like to thank double aisle megaplanes, which allow you to cross over if someone is being too slow on the other side, which again encourages traffic flow and is, in my opinion, not rude.
Yeah, but then eventually you have to zipper merge getting off of the plane. So
if you can beat them to the next merge, then you've done your job.
There you go. Thanks to the random people that I would assign in every class in college and write stories about in my head to get through different semesters of college. It was just like, oh, who's going to be my person in this class? It's going to be you.
Wow.
All right.
Joey's muses. Joey's
it also like helped motivate
muses.
me to like go to class. I'm like, I got to go to class because, they're going to be there. And I like people I didn't know at all, like didn't talk to, just be like, well, they're gonna be there. Oh, I like should make sure I'm presentable. Like they're gonna be in the class. I don't want them to think negative of me. Like Meanwhile, these are like random people that I never spoke to and like had no relationship to, and probably had no idea. Like I didn't cross their radar, but like helpful tool.
They're your what do I want to call it? Is it like a I'm somehow torn between the term unicorn and zucchini. Someone correct me on this, but I believe that's like the term. There's like a term for somebody who like you cross paths with but don't. It's sort of like a one way. Well, anyway, to be revisited.
Well,
I'd also like to thank, on this subject, the Accademia Gallery in Florence, where I learned about Michelangelo creeping on the workmen in the quarry to understand musculature and become a better sculptor. So everyone needs a muse, and sometimes it's shirtless men at the quarry, if that's what you're into.
sometimes you are the muse, and sometimes you're the musee who is just a creepy Italian painter.
Yeah, just like pretty creepy. Yep. Mm-hmm. But
just being
creating...
lecherous and whatever, in the quarry.
Wherever you find your inspiration.
Thanks to the lechers.
Y'all.
No thanks to the lechers. Keep the lechers.
Don't. Yeah, you stay away.
No thank you to lechers. Don't be a lecher. All right, well, we did it.
Bye.
Love you, mean it, bye.
To get to the bottom of where we might find... No, that's not a question. Alex, scratch this.